Welcome students to lesson 2.4. We're going to talk about linear measurement today. So linear measurement is just another fancy way of saying length or distance. So let's begin with talking about perimeter. Perimeter is the length or the distance around some type of geometric figure. So for instance, we have this square right here. And we want to know how far around, like if I wanted to tie a ribbon around it, how much ribbon would I need? What is the distance all the way around, or the length all the way around this square? Well, there's two ways to do it. Actually, there's three ways. The first way is pretty straightforward. You just take the measurement from each side and add it all together. And we have 4 fours. We know that would be 16. The other way to do it is to treat it like a rectangle and say 2 times the length plus 2 times the width is going to give me 16 anyway. So that'd be 2 times the length of 4 meters plus 2 times the width of 4 meters. That would be 8 meters plus 8 meters would still give me 16 meters. But since this is a square and all 4 dimensions are the same, the easiest way to do it is just to say 4 times 4 meters, which would be 16 meters. A much faster and easier method when you know you have a square. But the perimeter of a rectangle can always be found by 2 times the length plus 2 times the width, or just adding up all the sides, the lengths of all the sides. The other type of perimeter that we're going to use is that of a circle. And the perimeter of a circle is called the circumference. And we call it that so that you can tell the difference between the two. We know that the perimeter is around a polygon, something that has flat sides, but it can also be the distance around something that has both flat and curved sides. Circumference is the distance around a circle. So it has to be a circle to use this formula. And this formula is the circumference is equal to diameter times pi. Now the diameter is 2 times the radius. In these formulas, d is the diameter and r is the radius. Now what is pi? Pi is the ratio that is relevant to the diameter versus the distance around the circle. When we take the diameter and multiply it times pi, then we get really close to the distance around the circle. However, pi is a non-terminating, non-repeating decimal, which makes it an irrational number, which means we can't actually calculate it. So in algebra, we typically do not calculate pi. We leave it as the symbol. But in everyday life, when you need to know how much fabric to cut, you can't tell the seamstress, I need 10 pi. She needs to know where to stop and where to cut it at. So if we round it to 3.14, we get really, really close to what we actually need. We don't need any more precision than that in our everyday life. When we get more precise than that, then we wouldn't be able to cut it anyway. We wouldn't be able to measure it anyway because it'd be too small. So 2 decimal places is plenty for everyday life. So whenever we want to calculate something, the circumference of a circle, we would say the diameter, whatever the diameter is, which is 2 times the radius, we would say 2 times the radius times 3.14. That's what we will be using in this course. We will not use the pi symbol. We will go ahead and calculate it out. So I know those of you that took algebra, pre-algebra and algebra 1, maybe even algebra 2, were very frustrated with that you didn't get to calculate 3.14. That's because algebra seeks to be precise. In everyday life, close enough is close enough. You know, just what we're actually going to put our hands on is all we need to know. So that is why we go ahead and use 3.14 in consumer math. All right, so let's do some actual example problems. So our first example problem says to find the perimeter in feet of a rectangle whose length is 2.5 yards and whose width is 5 feet. If you've paid attention, you notice that this one says yards and this one says feet. And it says it wants the perimeter in feet. So I find it helpful to actually draw out what it is that I am doing. So I'm going to draw my rectangle first, and then I'm going to label it. So the length is 2.54 or 2.5 yards. I'm thinking about centimeters to inches, obviously. And then the width is 5 feet. Okay, yards, I've got to convert that to feet in order to get perimeter in feet. So I'm going to have to do a little conversion unit math here. So 2.5 yards over 1. And I know in a yard there's 3 feet. So I'm going to say 3 feet in 1 yard. And the yards will cancel. 2.5 times 3 gives me 7.5 feet. So I am going to replace yards with feet. Now I can use my formula. 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. And my length is always the longer measurement. Length is always the longer measurement. If you don't know that, then that is what we're going to always use. When I say length, I always mean the longer of the two measurements. So 2 times 7.5 plus 2 times 5. So that's going to be 15 feet plus 10 feet. So that's going to equal 25 feet is our distance around. And if you had added those all up as 4 separate measurements, you'd have gotten the exact same measurement. But now we have perimeter in feet. Let's look at another example problem. So here in example 2, we have to find the perimeter of a square with each side equal to 6 centimeters. So again, I'm going to draw that out just to make it easier on myself to see what's going on. So here's my square, and each side is 6 centimeters. I'm just going to make that obvious to myself. So now I can see I've got 4 6s. So I know the perimeter formula of a square is 4 times the length of a side. So that's 6 centimeters. 4 times 6 is 24. So I have 24 centimeters for my perimeter. Pretty straightforward. Squares are really easy to find the perimeter of. So now let's look at the last example problem. Find the circumference of a circle whose radius is 8 meters. So I'm going to draw myself a circle just for the sake of having a reference. And here's the center of my circle. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be for me, right? So 8 meters is the radius. So now I know my formula. The circumference is equal to pi times the diameter. Diameter times pi. And the diameter is 2 times the radius. So sometimes you're going to see the formula as circumference is 2 pi r, because 2 times the radius is the diameter. It's the same thing. When you're only given the radius, then sometimes it's easier to look at this one. So I know that that's going to be 2 times 3.14 times 8 meters. So I could just put all that in the calculator. There's no reason not to. So let's do 2 times 3.14 times 8. That's 50.24. So 50.24 meters is the length of my circumference around this circle. All right, pretty straightforward. That's all we have for this lesson on linear measurement or distance, or length, which is the same thing. I will see you in lesson 2.5.